This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. Guys, before we jump into the episode with Tim Leffel, just wanted to apologize for my audio quality here. I obviously selected the wrong microphone or something, so the audio is a little lower quality than you will normally expect on a My Latin Life episode, but we're going to put out the episode anyway, and you can expect better audio on the next one. Without further ado, here's the episode with Tim Leffel. Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. My guest today is Tim Leffel. Tim is a legendary, award-winning travel writer. He's been around for a long time and author of many books, including A Better Life for Half the Price. Tim, how's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. Good talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You are definitely one of the guests that I always wanted on the podcast. So I'm happy we finally made it happen.
Yeah,
and I feel like I know you because I've
and
heard
we're
so
not
many.
that far away from each other, so maybe one of these days in real life.
Yeah, I actually have a lot of episodes coming out around the same time with guys in that central Mexico area. So it'll kind of coincide that there'll be like two guys from Querétaro, two guys from Guanajuato, two guys from San Miguel, all almost sequential in terms of podcasts. So there's enough in that north of Mexico City area that I'm going to have to pay a trip.
Yeah, for sure.
We've also had other guests previous guests on the podcast that you'd be familiar with. We've had Dave's Travel Corner, who's another OG like yourself.
Yeah.
We've had James Guzman from Borderless.
Okay, yeah.
And we've had Dan Andrews, who I've heard on a previous podcast appearance that you like Tropical MBA podcast. So we had Dan from Tropical MBA.
Yeah, that's one of them that I have auto-loaded on my podcast listener. I like listening to those guys, and running a business, it's good to kind of get their mixed perspectives on things, although they're scaling up much bigger than I ever will.
Maybe for people who are unfamiliar, tell us a little bit about your illustrious career as a travel writer, because you've been doing it 10 plus years, 15 plus years.
Yeah, it gets harder to do a condensed version the longer it goes on. But in short, I used to work in the music business when I got out of college. That's what I studied, music and business. And I worked for a record company when they called them that, in Nashville, Tennessee, and New York City. And I met my now wife in New York, and we eventually chucked all that and went traveling around the world and circled the globe 3 times. And I decided I liked that life a lot better than working in an office, and eventually turned a part-time travel writing career into a full-time one. And I've been full-time since 2006. Basically, in the old days, you could freelance for magazines and newspapers, and that was about it. And then when the internet came along, it just allowed everybody to chart their own path and avoid the gatekeepers and all that. So I started launching websites, and the first one was my Cheapest Destinations blog, which is still running. It's been up since 2003, so I think that's maybe the longest running single person travel blog out there. Really? And I've always done all the content for that one. But then I launched some other sites to kind of fill a niche here and there, to fill a hole in the market. And so basically I run 5 of them, and one's for travel writers. So it's kind of inside baseball, but the other 4 are consumer travel sites. And then, like you mentioned, I have some books out, and I still do some freelancing here and there. I've written for Outside and CNN and some other big publications, but I prefer running my own show and saying whatever I want when I have the choice.
And of course, the book, A Better Life for Half the Price.
Yeah, so that's my Living Abroad book. It's in its 2nd edition. And Yeah, I'm just trying to get the point across in that it's not such a scary thing to do. There are lots of people that have done it before, but you have to have the right, framework, the right mental state, and the right desires in life to do that. So first, examine, what where you're actually coming from and where you want to go and what's the ideal place. And then I try to present some options for, I think, 19 countries where you can easily live for half what you're spending in the US or UK or Canada.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I think it's just the simple currency arbitrage differences, what makes up a lot of it. These countries have a GDP, per capita that's half of what the US is or less. And so basically you're earning in your home currency or using your retirement funds or whatever, and then you're spending in a country where costs are just far less. And that doesn't mean everything is cheaper. As you know, living in Mexico, like anything that's imported is probably going to cost you more than it did at home. But a lot of these countries, they grow a lot, they produce a lot, and so you kind of get the advantage of lower food prices and lower utility bills and cheaper rent, and taxis are less. Anything that requires labor is less. So getting your house cleaned, taking a cab across town, getting your shoes repaired, any of that kind of stuff. So that's true in places in Latin America. There are places in Asia. There are places in Europe, even. So the idea is to look around and see where you can make your money go further. Either maybe you just want to lower your expenses, like you're overwhelmed by how much you're spending every month on just getting by, and you want to have a better life for half the price. Thus the title. Or a lot of people are looking to start a business and they want to extend their runway, as they say. If you go live in Chiang Mai for a year, it's a lot easier to launch an online business from there and live cheaply than it is to try to do it from New York City or San Francisco.
How many countries have you been to at this point?
Oh wow! I have this blog post called "How many countries have you been to?" I don't care, because my point is, I don't want to be a country counter just for the sake of ticking off boxes. And I've been to Peru 5 or 6 times. I've been to Colombia many times. I've been to Bulgaria 5 or 6 times, and so I tend to go back to places and try to explore them more in depth. But I always say I think it's close to my age, and I'm nearing 60, so I've been to a lot. I've been to all of them in the both of my books, the World's Cheapest Destinations and Better Life for Half the Price, except for Georgia, the country of Georgia. So
Hmm.
that's one I still need to get to.
And I know that you're not exclusively a Latin America guy, right? You've done Eastern Europe, you've done Asia, things like that. But you've found yourself basing up in Mexico, and you split your time between Tampa, Florida, and Guanajuato, Mexico. How did you make that decision to choose Mexico above all of these illustrious cheap destinations or other more far flung regions that might be less covered for a travel writer?
Well, first of all, I really do like the food and the culture. And if you're going to learn another language, Spanish is certainly the most useful one in this part of the world. So all of those played a factor. I really like the city I'm in a lot. It's called Guanajuato. It's a UNESCO World Heritage City, a historic city, but it's not that big. It's only about a quarter million, and you can walk everywhere. Like there's more pedestrian streets than ones with cars on them by far. It looks very much like a city in Spain that you would see when you go to Europe. And the weather's really nice, and so all those things played a factor. But a lot of it was just convenience, to be honest. Like I spent a year, I mean not a year, a month, living in Thailand last year, and it was a royal pain in the rear trying to run my business from there.
Mm.
Not for the online asynchronous stuff, that doesn't matter so much. But if you need to make a phone call, good God, like you got to get up at 4 in the morning, or you come back, you want to go out, you come back, and you've had a few drinks, and then you've got some message you have to answer. It's a pain in the, it's a royal pain, and so being like exactly opposite of this hemisphere is really tough. And then also I've my mother's still alive, my wife's mother's still alive, and so we go back and see family. My daughter's now living on her own in the U.S., and I do business there. I go to conferences, I have meetings with people, and um, so I think the further away you get, the harder it gets. And I really like Argentina. I could live there in a second, but that's a long overnight flight to get back from there. And so all of that played a factor. And at the time when I first moved down here, my father was still alive as well, but he was, ailing, and I needed to go back and see him on a regular basis. So those things are important to keep in mind. Or sometimes you meet retirees that want to be not too far away because they've got grandkids and they want to get back to see them, or they got health issues and they want to, make use of their Medicaid or whatever, Medicare. So they
Hmm.
they need to fly back sometimes to have those kind of things done. Although healthcare is better everywhere else in the world, I feel like, and less expensive. But if you're on Medicare, then you are getting socialized medicine, so it can make sense to go back for a while.
Yeah, let me ask you about how you think about medicine and healthcare, because you're basically where I'm going to be in a couple decades' time, right? Where I'm going to have to figure out how to handle this kind of thing, where maybe there's a bit of a pension coming from North America and maybe some sort of free healthcare, who knows? But then, as you said, healthcare is much better in Latin America. How do you deal with it? Like, do you pay out of pocket? You probably have some sort of insurance plan in Mexico. And then do you go back to the States for more complicated procedures, or how do you kind of do it?
I'll start with the last thing. The only medical care I've gone back to the U.S. for since I came to Mexico is for COVID vaccines, because if you went to the U.S., you could get whatever you wanted, but if you got it in Mexico, it was just kind of a roll of the dice. Like you might get a Russian one, you might get a Chinese one. Like there was not much control there, so we got our shots back in the U.S. But and those were free, by the way, so it wasn't any cost to it, and we were already going back for other reasons. But everything else, I just pay out of pocket. As you know, it's quite inexpensive to get medical care in Mexico, whether you're going to the dentist or going to a doctor or getting lab tests done. Any of that stuff is a fraction of what you would pay in the U.S., and often better quality too. I mean, you get better service with the doctor. They're not in a hurry. They'll give you their cell phone number half the time.
Hmm.
My dentist is super thorough. I've had some work done here for literally like a fourth of what it would have cost in the U.S., and I think the quality was much better as well. But we do have a catastrophic insurance plan. It's like an expat insurance plan, and it's not all that cheap, but the reason it's not all that cheap is it covers us in the US as well. Like you can just get by with travel insurance if you're only going back to the US for a week or two. But if you're going longer than that, usually 14 days is kind of the cutoff for a lot of travel insurance for the US, just because the US is so darn expensive for healthcare. So basically, we have this policy that we're paying more for because it covers us when we're in the US, because sometimes we're there for like a month at a time, staying at my mother-in-law's place in Tampa Bay. And so, you don't want to get in a car wreck in the US and not have health insurance. So I feel like it's important for us to be covered.
Hmm. So, what's your ultimate recommendation for expats living in Mexico or Latin America? They get, and let's say they're down to spend less than 2 weeks per trip in the USA or Canada.
I would just pay out of pocket and then also maybe have some kind of Mexican catastrophic care plan, which will cost very little. And that's just in case you get diagnosed with cancer or you get hit by a bus or something, like just routine things are not going to cost you that much. Even like my wife had to go get a routine colonoscopy done, and I think it was like a fifth of what it would have been in the US, like those kind of things. Even you just can pay out of pocket or use a credit card, it's not a big deal. But if something major happens, then, you know, in theory, if you have residency in Mexico, you could go to the public hospital and it's covered. But, do you really want to go to the public hospital is the question. Like, you probably want to pay to go to a private one if you're able.
Hmm. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And so, for the retirees, like, how does it work what's the common situation that you're seeing? Because I hear lots of situations where when I talk to at least Canadian retirees, they say, "Yeah, I'll chill in Mexico until I'm like really old, and then I gotta go back to Canada when I can get the free care when I'm 85 and I need like lots of care." And I look at that and I'm like, but the free care in Canada sucks. Like, wouldn't you still be better off just paying out of pocket when you're or whatever, just doing it locally in Mexico? I just don't even see why they want to go back when they're at a really advanced age.
Yeah, I agree because, Canada's healthcare system is great in the sense that it's paid for out of your taxes, but you do have a wait for a lot of things. You have to wait for procedures and
Hmm.
getting in to see your doctor's not all that quick. And yeah, I mean, I've thought about this. Like, if I get to a point where I need like home health care, I would much rather have that in Mexico. You could have somebody full time for, not much
Exactly.
money.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so I think that would be a far superior experience. You could still stay home, you don't have to, go to some nursing home or whatever. And I don't know, you have better weather. Like, I would just much rather be here. So yeah, I don't really get that thinking, but I do have some older retired friends that will just hop on a plane and go back. Like, I just had this friend who had a knee injury and she had to go get knee surgery. So she flew to San Antonio or somewhere in Texas on a direct flight. Um, and it was like on Viva Aerobus, so it was like $85 or something. She just flew back, got the knee surgery done, and then a couple of days later came back to Mexico. And so I think that's probably the ideal way to do it. Just make use of it when you really need it on a one-off basis. And there is a hospital in Guadalajara that is somehow affiliated with the U.S. Medicare system. Where so I've heard that people that live around Lake Chapala can just go up to Guadalajara and go to a certain hospital and get work done. But I don't know what the details are.
Mm. Yeah, and
But
what do you
Canada's
think?
a bit weird because I also know that there's a lot of snowbirds from Canada and Mexico and other Latin American countries that only come down for 5 months or so and then they go back up because there's something that you can lose your health care coverage if you're away more than that, more than 6 months.
Yeah, I don't think you actually would lose it, but they think that anyway.
It
Yeah,
depends on what province you're in. I think it's not a national thing, it's a provincial rule.
I see. And yeah, just to kind of double down on this, because it is something I'm curious about, and you are kind of one of the best people to talk about this. So, do you think that it's good to be like a young retiree in Mexico? You know what I mean, like 50s up to maybe 75, and then go back home for advanced stuff when you've kind of hit that 75 mark? Or do you think you're basically just good in Mexico, good in Latin America for life?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. If you have the money, unless you're really, scraping by, which hopefully you're not as a retiree, like you've got Social Security, which can easily cover your living expenses, just that. Or you've got, some kind of pension or IRA or 401k or whatever. And again, it stretches a long way in the healthcare system here. So even if you had full time healthcare every month, you'd still spend less on than you would spend just on rent in the US. So I think you're better off just, yeah, sticking to here. And we're talking about Mexico, but places like Panama and Costa Rica, they have, really gleaming world class hospitals. So even Ecuador. So it's not like you're slumming it if you're going to these places. They've all got Western trained doctors and the best equipment and everything. It's just that costs are lower because the what the locals can afford is lower, and you don't have this for-profit healthcare system where everybody's trying to get their cut and there's five different middlemen.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by Language Blend, the new best way to learn Spanish. Language Blend focuses on what you actually need to live and get by abroad with daily one-on-one lessons, a dedicated texting partner. It's like living in a Spanish-speaking country without ever leaving home. Go to languageblend.com for more information. Makes sense. Yeah, I totally see. As long as you speak a decent level of Spanish, I don't see why you would need to go back to the US for almost anything. Like maybe they might have a couple really specialized cancer machines or something like that. But
Yeah,
any,
if you have
any,
something really oddball, some rare condition, then it would make sense. But like in Panama, there one of those hospitals is affiliated with Johns Hopkins. It's like
Mhm.
they got doctors going back and forth. So unless you've got some rare blood disease or something, you're probably okay where you are.
That's good. That's good. And what are some of the other concerns that hopeful expats and retirees have when they come to Mexico? Because I'm sure you spend quite a lot of time, um, you know, helping them out with these concerns.
Well, I think people that haven't spent much time abroad tend to worry about the wrong things. They worry about safety, even though the U.S. is one of the most dangerous countries in the world. They worry about getting ripped off all the time, even though, unless you're in Cancun, you're probably not going to get ripped off by Mexicans on a regular basis. You're not going to get cheated. They worry about the language, which is valid. But I mean, these days, with when my wife goes to the doctor, she speaks pretty good Spanish, but when she goes to a doctor or specialist about something, she just like, works it all out with Google Translate ahead of time, what she needs to say. And then on the spot, you can do that if are having a communication problem. Like now the technology is to the point where, you can communicate with each other, even if you're in Bulgaria, you don't speak a word of Bulgarian, but in Spanish, it's normally a hurdle that's easy to get past, I think. I mean, you do want to learn the language just so you know what's going around you and you can read the signs and you can at least communicate with shopkeepers and restaurants and whatever, but you don't have to be to the point where you know advanced medical terms to get by. um, and then, another legitimate concern is finding housing. Like it just doesn't work the way it does in a Western country where you can just pull stuff up on the internet and arrange 5 appointments and then go pick an apartment. We won't even get into House Hunters International, but that's basically entertainment TV. It's not reality. You do have to have feet on the ground. You do have to talk to people. You might have to enlist a Spanish speaking helper to find an apartment, but just be patient, give it time, and you'll find a place that you like, and it'll be a good deal. It's just takes some patience.
Okay. So safety, not a big concern. Scams, not a big concern. Spanish, you can get by. House hunting is definitely an interesting one because that does involve a certain level of effort. So if the first three there aren't as genuine of concerns as people make them out to be, what should be on people's radar?
Just one other one, real quick, that I just thought of that I get questions on a lot, which is the banking situation, and that one also is not really concerned because I've never had a Mexican bank. I just pull stuff out of my U.S. bank, and there are debit cards you can get that won't charge you a fee, and there's others you can get that are even better that will reimburse the local charges, like ones through credit unions or Schwab or Fidelity or some of the other brokerages. So yeah, that's not really an issue either. And you can use your U.S. credit cards for most things, and you can send money with Wise and PayPal and all those things. So yeah, banking's not really an issue either. Um, but yeah, I mean, just I think the cultural thing is what people have the most difficulty with, especially if they haven't traveled a lot in Latin America already. Just things move much more slowly. um, that people are not in a hurry. They're not workaholics. If they've got a family thing at 2 o'clock and you're wanting them to come by your house to do some work at 4, that's not going to happen. And they're not going to come by on Sunday, even if they'll tell you they are. So I just think it's like important to, slow down and adapt and not get all worked up about it. I mean, if the contractor says they're coming by at 10 and they don't show up till 2, it's not worth getting angry about because that's pretty normal. So
Hmm.
I think that's the hardest thing that type A personalities especially have a hard time getting used to. Is just the sense of time is very different. There's not much urgency, and things get done eventually, but maybe not on your schedule.
Yeah, I had one this past week for a chiropractor, and he said, "Yeah, yeah, come. We'll have you come back on Monday, and we'll see you on Monday." And I'm like, "Cool." And then I leave the office, I contact them on WhatsApp, and I'm like, "Hey, let's get it set up for Monday." And they're like, "Oh, there's no appointments on Monday." I'm like, "Oh."
Yeah. There's that thing you see this in some Asian cultures too, where they hate to say no and they don't want to disappoint you. So they'll tell you what you want to hear, even if it's not true.
Yeah. Back to banking, I was actually curious how you do it because you've been in Mexico for so long. I'm actually surprised that you're able to continue not having a Mexican bank account and and basically just using the you know ATM reimbursement debit cards. Or tell me a little bit more about your exact strategy.
Well, I just haven't run into an issue where it has really mattered. Like even when I bought real estate, the money just got wired to their account from the US and it was no big deal. And, I have, I don't know, I do transactions here all the time and I've never had to really, there's been no need to have a Mexican bank really. And, I see the lines outside of them, especially twice a month when it's payday. And it's like, oh, I don't want to deal with
Like
that.
keep saying that.
um, the one problem I've run into is there's some situations where you try to use a U.S. credit card and it gets rejected. Like if you're trying to buy a bus ticket or buy something from Mercado Libre, which is like a sort of eBay site, sometimes they won't accept a foreign credit card and they'll only accept a Mexican one. But even in those cases, you can use PayPal or you can just go pay the bill at OXXO, which is kind of a weird thing to adjust to. But again, there's a counterpart in Asia with 7-Eleven. Like you can pretty much do everything from an OXXO, including sending money to Mexican people. They just have to give you their 16-digit debit card number, which kind of blows my mind. That's how it works. But you basically go into OXXO and give that 16-digit number to the person at the counter, the same person you buy beer from, and
Mhm.
they'll input the info, and then magically that money just shows up in that person's account after you hand the clerk some cash. So yeah, it's pretty easy to do things in other ways here, and probably part of that is because there's so much money flowing back and forth between the U.S. and Mexico every day, like people sending remittances and sending money to their relatives and whatever. So um, yeah, it's pretty easy to send money back and forth, and then just there's ATM machines everywhere, even in tiny little towns now.
Yeah, that's why there's always a huge line at the OXXO. One guy's paying his Telcel bill, one guy's sending money.
Yeah, you can pay your bills there too. So it is a problem if you are just trying to buy a soda and you're behind like 10 people trying to do financial transactions.
Yeah, seriously, those OXXO workers, shout out to them because they have to know so many things.
I think that's why there's a help wanted sign on every single one of them.
I do want to keep doubling down on this bank thing. I honestly can't believe. Are you purposely choosing not to get a Mexican bank account, or you just literally don't see the need?
Yeah, I literally don't see the need. Like my business is based in the US and Um, even I actually ran a tour company here for 6 years, a local walking tour company. I since sold it to my head guide earlier this year. But even for that, like I don't know. I went and got the tax ID number because I had to for Airbnb because we ran an Airbnb experience. But even
Hmm.
with that, like they didn't need a Mexican bank account and number or anything.
So the Airbnb paid you to your U.S. bank.
Yes, and it paid the Mexican taxes too, like that were required, whatever that is. Like
Uh huh.
if you rent your Airbnb apartment, I think that's how it works too. They just pay Mexico themselves.
Yeah, they do like a withholding.
Yeah.
And did you use a Mexican accountant to square it out at the end?
No, I just had to go to the office and sit around for a couple hours and do a bunch of paperwork, but it wasn't no, in the end it was pretty painless what actually had to happen. I mean, I am a permanent resident here, so I guess that makes it easier. Gets rid of some complications. But yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of the expats I know don't have a Mexican bank, and if they do, it's just because they think they might need it to pay a housekeeper or something. I don't know. Like I don't
Hmm.
see a lot of reasons for it. If they
So
have a business, that's a different story. Like if you own a coffee shop or a restaurant or something, then you need one. But if you run a remote business, I don't think it's necessary.
So do you find that you're taking out a lot of money from the ATM per month? Because I think I heard that you own your home in Guanajuato, but even still, you must be taking out over 20,000 pesos per month from the ATM to cover just like all your expenses, buy groceries, this and that.
Yeah, maybe, but at the big grocery stores, you can use a card. So a lot of times I'll just put that on a debit card or credit card and then pay it off. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I take out somewhere in that area each month. But you could take like 7 or 8 thousand at a time out at the ATM, and then my wife takes out
Hmm.
money too. So between us, it's pretty easy. The only time it creates a problem is like we just had some work done on our house where we built a staircase up to the roof, and so we were literally going every day or two to the ATM and pulling out a bunch of cash. So that's and then you hand it to the guy and you feel like you're doing a drug deal because it's this big stack, you know.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that's the only time where it's really an issue. And again, like it's back to that patience and understanding thing. They're not expecting to get all their money up front anyway. So, you have to pay them part of it up front and then you pay the rest over the weeks as they're doing the work. And so, yeah, it wasn't really an issue. And I used to pay rent, but even then, I think that was $800 a month when we were paying rent. And so, you just kind of plan ahead and take out the cash. Um, Otherwise, yeah, it's just regular monthly living expenses, which are not that much. And my utility bills are next to nothing because this is a place where the weather's pretty spring like all year. So you don't really use heat or air conditioning. So
Hmm.
our utility bills are like literally 10 or 15 bucks a month for water and for electricity.
Hmm. Hmm. So I guess you've been basically, sorry if this is too in depth, but you've basically been pulling out $1,000 a month from the ATM for like 15 years.
Yeah, pretty much so. And I do have one of those cards with no fees. It's from Fidelity. I just have a cash account there.
Uh-huh.
I have a brokerage there, but it's just basically a money market account, and you transfer money from wherever you want, and then they reimburse the local ATM fees. I still go to the cheapest one, the one that charges the lowest fee, because I'm afraid that if I don't, it's going to come back to bite me someday. But yeah, I think the fee is 18 pesos or something like that, about $1, and so Fidelity just reimburses that every time, and then they don't charge a fee.
Got it. And so you do it all just on the same card, like just with Fidelity, or do you kind of spread it out between a couple different ones?
I mostly do it through that one, though. I have a few backups because I've actually written about this, that it's very important to have backups because you never know if you're going to lose
Yeah.
your card or it gets eaten or it's expired and you need a new one. So I have, God, I got three debit backups, probably one business account, one checking account, and PayPal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good. So Fidelity's been good to you for a decade, and they haven't have you ever got some kind of warning, or you ever call them up and try to do some stuff,
No,
and they're kind of
no,
like, "Hey,
never. They've been great. And then my wife has one from Capital One. It's called the Capital One 360 card, and they don't reimburse the local fee. But again, she's paying $1 each time. But they don't charge one themselves. So all it's costing her to get her money out is $1 each time.
right?" So they don't charge her on the U.S. side; she just pays the Mexico side one.
Exactly.
Okay. And I think I heard in another interview that you're 100% ATM gang. You don't bring US cash down when you go to Tampa or whatever. Do you try to get like just under 10K and then like bring like 5K, 9K back to Mexico and exchange that, or it's not even worth it with the exchange rate?
No, I don't even bother with that because you get a better rate at the ATM than you do at the physical cash exchange places. And I don't have any need for dollars here. Like if I lived in Playa del Carmen, it would be a different story. You can pay for a lot of things with dollars in
I wouldn't
tourist
recommend
areas
that. But
if
no,
you
I just
want.
meant to like exchange it just to like not put so much through the ATM, I guess. I don't know.
No, I mean, so far, if it ever becomes a problem, then I might adjust. But the only time I've brought tons of cash with me is when I went to Argentina, which I would strongly advise
Right.
because you get a different rate, a much better rate, like double.
Okay, so you have it here. Sorry if I had to triple down on this too much. Hopefully, people find this logistic stuff
No,
interesting.
it's no problem. I mean, it is interesting, and I don't know if that's the best strategy for every country. And then you have oddball ones in the mix, like Ecuador and Panama, where they actually use U.S. dollars. So
Right.
then, it's a different calculation.
Hmm. Do you ever use Western Union to like send it money to other people or even to yourself to like go pick it up, or no Western Union?
I used to use that in MoneyGram, but it was for a different reason. We used to have a little beach house in on the Gulf Coast near Merida, and it was just like a vacation home before I ever moved here. And we had a housekeeper who took care of the place and cleaned up and everything. So we used to use that to send money to her so she could just go in and pick it up. But I never used it to send money to myself.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I know I wanted to ask you about kids, so and raising kids in Mexico, raising expat kids in Mexico, school, this kind of thing. Can we get into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Because this is something that is part of the rite of passage of the I guess the flow or the transition from digital nomad to expat, right? Is you start coming down as maybe a single guy. For the people listening to this, you meet a nice Latina and you want to start living in Mexico, and then it comes up a whole range of new questions about having babies in Latin America, having babies in Mexico, schools in Mexico, vaccines in Mexico, all these different things, right? And so, if I recall your situation correctly, you had a daughter that was already in middle school, something like that, and then you moved to Mexico. You had your kid in the U.S. and then you moved to Mexico.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of common too. Like a lot of people get the itch to move abroad, but they've got a kid in school and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to have to wait till they're 18." And it's like,
Hmm.
"No, you don't have to do that." Like there are schools everywhere and, some people homeschool
Schools
too
everywhere.
if you have
That's
the
funny.
personality for it, but neither of us really did. But so my daughter was 10 when we moved the first time. So she was still in elementary school. And I will say at the top, it's way easier when they're younger than it is when they get into high school because honestly, when you're in elementary school, what you're learning is not going to change your life. It's not like you're on a career track or anything. So I don't think it really matters where in the world you go to school when you're that age. And she was at a Waldorf school, which is kind of like crunchy granola. They spend a lot of time like
Sure.
playing and doing woodworking and you know
The
putting
Waldorf
on
School was in the States or in Mexico?
no, in Mexico. Yeah,
Okay.
they're all over, and there's one here. There's also a Montessori school here. It was in Spanish though, which was there we're not in a big city. Like if you were in Mexico City, you would have lots more choices. But so she went to that school and learned Spanish really quickly because that's what all her friends spoke. There was only one other foreigner in her class, and it went fine. It wasn't very academically rigorous, but that was okay. Like I'm saying, I don't think it matters that much. And then we went back to the States for a bit, and then we came back to Mexico. And then she was in middle school, and she did that for 2 years. And there we started seeing more cracks in the system academically. Like it was a private school, but and probably the best one here, but still, it just again wasn't very academically rigorous, and it was kind of like Harry Potter with the School of Dark Arts teacher. I think she had five math teachers in the 2 year period she was here. Like they just kept rotating through, and just they would spend time on silly stuff, and they would have a they would have a holiday like every week or two. It seemed like like there's so many Mexican holidays, and then they would just make up ones of their own. It seemed like, but anyway, like our main goal was for her to have the cultural experience and to get fluent in Spanish and to bond with some people her age, and all of that was accomplished. But then we went back to the US for her last 3 years, for the last 3 years of high school, and that was partly her decision. She really wanted to go to a school that looked like the ones on the Disney Channel, with cafeteria and lockers and all that kind of stuff. And the drama club, which she was in. And the school she went to in Mexico was quite small. And, they had, I think, 12, 18 people in their class, something like that. And that was the whole class. So she wanted to go back. And so we didn't try to push it. And we went back to the States for those 3 years. And then when she went off to college, we said adios and returned to Mexico. And that was 2018. And we've been here permanently ever since.
Hey guys, quick interruption to tell you about Bitrefill. Bitrefill is the best way to convert your crypto into gift card balances. These are gift cards that you can spend at hotels.com, Airbnb, Nike, and many more. You may remember Joel Valenzuela, previous podcast guest. He's been living on crypto exclusively since 2015, and he's a big consumer of Bitrefill. And so I asked Joel, I said, what do you like most about Bitrefill? He said that he likes the instant delivery, the precise amount so that you don't have to juggle a lot of gift cards, and he loves the global selection. Nobody else has this much selection of gift cards, over 10,000 gift card options across hundreds of countries. Go to bitrefill.com to sign up, and you can also use the code MyLatinLife for 10% back off your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point that you mentioned. Like the empty nesters have no problem moving to Latin America. The younger guys have no problem moving to Latin America. It's people with the school age children that feel stuck. And we definitely don't want anyone to feel stuck in a place where they're not happy. So, could we walk through a little bit? Because this is basically what you did, right? Your daughter was how old when you guys moved? 10, 12, 14?
She was 10, yeah. And she was not happy about all of this, as you can imagine. Like, she had grown up in Nashville, Tennessee, and lived there her whole life. And then we basically told her, we're still in our house, we're moving, and we're not coming back here. And that's a tough thing for a kid that age. Although it's easier at that age than it would be if they were a teenager, because then they've got really embedded friendships, and clubs and sports and all that stuff. So again, it's easier when they're younger. Um, but yeah, I mean, we chose this city because we love the city. But if the schools had been the biggest priority, we could have moved to San Miguel de Allende, an hour and a half down the road, and there's probably 3 or 4 schools in English. If you want that for your child, and some of them are pretty academically rigorous. You could go to Mexico City or Guadalajara, and then you could put them in an international baccalaureate school, which is
IB,
up to
yeah.
this high standards of international education if you wanted to. But I thought it was more important for her to learn Spanish and learn the culture and all of that than it was for her to you know be able to pass the standardized math tests. And so, um, it's a matter of your priorities. But my point is, all the options are out there. You can go to a Waldorf school, you can go to a Montessori school, you can go to a baccalaureate school, you could put them in the public education system if you wanted. And we wouldn't have minded that, except the class sizes are really big. Like, at least where we are, you can have 35, 40 kids in a classroom. And I think that's just mayhem, and it's hard to really learn much, in my opinion. So we avoided that. But if you were in a city where the class sizes weren't so huge, then that could be an option as well.
Hmm. Yeah, in a previous podcast, you said something funny that I really liked. It was like, look, like the kids' school doesn't even matter from like until they get to high school because up until arguably middle school, high school, it's basically just like babysitting, right? And it's like here's red, here's blue, like it's not a big deal. And but you said it in an interesting way. You said, I guess the gap between a good and a bad school starts expanding as the kid gets older. So like maybe from like 0 to 8, like if it was like a chart with 2 lines, the 2 lines are like basically the same until you're like maybe 8 or 10 years old. And then at that point the 2 lines start diverging a little bit. And once you get into high school, yeah, there's obviously some differences in terms of like mathematical ability and so forth. But it's pretty, I thought that was a cool way of explaining it.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about this now. You could probably ask anyone this. Think back on your elementary school days. Like, what did you really learn that you can remember at this point. And I mean, you learn the basics. You learn how to do basic math. You learn to read. You learn to draw. And you play sports, and whatever. But I mean, none of that fundamentally affects what you do for a career or anything. It's just like it's more social than anything. You're learning to learning to learn basically, and so I think you could do that in any kind of setting and culture.
Yeah, makes sense. And just to keep going with this, so well, what happened to your daughter now? Because now she's a young adult, right?
Yeah, so she went off to college, she finished, and now she worked for Disney for a year actually because she went to college in Orlando, and then that's what she did when she finished working in the park system. But now she's living in Atlanta, working for an events company, and still trying to get her dream job. But she's young and hasn't gotten there yet. But um, anyway, she's off on her own,
That's cool. We
and
won't put her feet to the fire where she's at now, but I was just curious. So she went to the U.S. for college?
yeah, she did, and she wanted to, and some kids are affected differently. Like some kids, it really opens up their eyes to the possibilities of the world, and maybe they want to study abroad, and maybe they want to work abroad. But she's not in that camp. She wanted to live in the U.S. and have everything that the U.S. provides for you culturally and convenience wise and all that. And so, we're not going to try to argue with her and convince her there's a better way. If
Hmm.
she wants to find it someday, she will. Um, but yeah, she's kind of blasé about travel, which is kind of funny. We've taken her, when she was young, we took her to Costa Rica and Guatemala and Canada and Southeast Asia and all these places. And um, some kids that totally, changes their life, and other kids is like, I'm gonna go watch the movie. That's where she is.
I mean, yeah, maybe she'll come back around and appreciate it more. But a couple questions about this. So, what was it like applying to the U.S. schools? I assume she had to do the SAT.
Yeah, she did all that, and part of all that was what went into the calculation about going back and doing the last 3 years in the U.S. as well. We thought it would be a whole lot easier for her to get a U.S. diploma, pass all those.
So she went back and did what? She stayed with the mother-in-law or some cousins?
No, no, we all moved back together. So we spent 3 years living
Oh,
together in Tampa,
oh, while
and
she did her high
yeah, while
school,
she
like
went to high
grades
school.
grades 10
So
to 12. Okay.
yeah, 10, 11, and 12. And we lived in downtown Tampa, and we went to a really good school that's in that area. So we didn't have to move out to the burbs um, like a lot of parents do for their school situation. Uh, and then, yeah, we hightailed it out of there because we were paying 2,200 a month, I think, for our rent for this 3-bedroom apartment, which was okay, but I'm sure now it's like 3 grand at least because that was whatever 2018 is when we left, and
Mm,
rents have gone up everywhere since then. And my my big comparison always is I tell people, the three of us spent less in Mexico on everything than we spent just on rent in Tampa, and that doesn't count utilities, car payment, insurance, all that other stuff.
interesting. So you went back for 3 years. You had to buy a car, do all
Yeah,
this
well, we
stuff.
leased one for 3 years because we had
These-
our end date in mind. We rented a Prius for 3 years to keep our, I mean, leased it, to keep our gas prices low, and then handed it back at the end and got on a plane.
Mm. You could have practically just sent her to a boarding school.
Yeah, we actually talked about that for a hot minute, but she was not up for that idea.
And what's funny is like I mean I'm sure she's a overachiever and everything, but it's funny. It is in a lot of ways like a sacrifice frame where maybe she felt like she had a lot of pressure on her, and if the SAT score wasn't high enough, it'd be like we came back to America for this, you know.
I know. Yeah. We do give her shit sometimes, but in a joking way. It's like, you know, the sacrifices we made for you. But then her comeback is, well, I sacrificed to go to Mexico, and I didn't want to do that. And so it's all
Yeah,
fair, I guess.
yeah.
But
Life is a balance. Did she become a Mexican citizen?
Well, she became a temporary resident because we had temporary residency when we were all here together. But no, not a citizen, not a permanent resident, although I guess she could have. But if she were going to come here and work, that would be a different story. But so far, that's not in the cards. But I just want to emphasize that, like I was talking about the wrenching lifestyle change it was for her to leave all her friends in the city she knew and everything. But like 2 weeks later, it was nothing, And I think that's a fear that a lot of parents have. Like, oh, this is going to be so hard on my kids. It's not hard. Like kids adapt really quickly, and yeah, she had to struggle for a little bit learning the language, but when you're immersed in it in school every day and all your friends are speaking it, you learn super fast. Like it's a lot easier than trying to learn in a classroom.
And did she get like full Mexican accent? 'Cause I'm just trying to think. She only spent maybe 4 or 5 years in Mexico. I mean, but
Yeah,
pretty pivotal years. Is she full like no mames or?
yeah. I'm sure she's losing some of it now, but she sounded like a Mexican when she talked on the phone for sure, and had a lot of local slang and everything. So it was good.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one with the high school. Definitely a lot of ways you can play that from within Mexico.
Yeah, and if that is really important to you to live here during your high school years or other Latin American countries, like I think you just need to go to a big city is the bottom line. Like if you want a really good high school education, you're going to have to spend the big bucks and send them to an international school. And that would be another cultural experience, but a very weird one because you'll be with politicians' kids and like the
Yeah,
captains of industries' kids.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I guess the Gringos kids fits in that mix. And what about homeschool? Like you probably know people all up and down the spectrum from like hippies to like everything, right? Do you find that homeschooling is a pretty big thing in Mexico or where you're at?
Yeah, it is because that totally opens up your options for location. Then you can be anywhere. And I think you can get a really good education through homeschooling these days because there's so many resources out there and it's a very well-worn path. You can get everything you need on the internet with videos and books and guides and video lessons and everything. And then if you do it right, you can still set up all the social activities so they have a real life. But the problem is, I think you got to be a really patient parent and not have any uh, battleground issues with your kids. Like my wife and my daughter were at each other's throats a lot. Like arguing about a lot of things on a regular basis. So it just would not have worked in the personality dynamic. But other parents have a much easier laid back dynamic with their kids and they're able to pull it off really
Right.
well. So, I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
you just have,
I think if you're like also if you're based up somewhere, you could get a couple parents together, pay for a teacher, and how much is a teacher? You know what I mean? A private teacher, you could probably get
yeah,
someone
for
for
sure. Maybe
twenty
20
thousand
bucks an hour.
pesos. Yeah, 1,000 bucks a month. I don't know. You get two teachers, 2,000 bucks a month. Split that between a couple parents. Not a big deal.
Yeah, and actually, you could pay them more than they're making at the private school, probably, because they're working for Mexican wages. So you could probably get the best teachers in town if you had a group of you together.
Yeah, makes me want to start a school. Cool. I'm trying to think if I have any more questions about parenting. Probably get you offline, get your WhatsApp, and uh, maybe some of these questions will come in the future. But
Yeah,
so
and just real quick, like we were talking about that tropical MBA podcast, and they had a couple episodes on there about alternative education options for parents. And there's some really interesting things going on here and there in certain communities where they have banded together, like you were talking about. There's a really good one in Nosara, Costa Rica, which is kind of a surf town,
mhm.
and parents are basically doing what you suggested. They've hired some local teachers. They've also tapped different parents that have different expertise. Like one of them was an oceanographer and is like teaching the science class. And then they do all these crazy, great nature excursions together. So you could have a better education abroad than you can have in the U.S. if you do it right, and the
Yeah.
educational possibilities as far as hands-on stuff could be a lot better.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I definitely see that. Um, I guess switching gears, even though I'd love to ask you about parenting all day, but just to keep a little flow to the interview or conversation. So, you have a website dedicated to luxury travel in Latin America. And I think it's a little bit secret, or people don't know it's you or something, but maybe you would love to hear about that to the extent that you're willing to diverge, because obviously, we talk all about Latin America here in My Latin Life.
Yeah, it's a situation where I use a pen name, and it's not a very original pen name. It's Timothy Scott, my first two names. And I simply do that to keep my Google profile clean, because I've got lots of articles about budget travel. I have books out on budget travel and living abroad for less. So it would look kind of weird if I'm on one hand doing all that and on the other hand talking about, hotels that cost $2,000 a night. So I basically kind of run that site as Timothy Scott, and he's a man of mystery who has no social media profile. But anyway, all the writers know I'm the same guy, everybody that works for me. But basically, I launched it back in 2007 when I saw a huge hole in the market. There was nobody covering the Americas, and there were all these new luxury hotels opening up, all these new high-end tours starting, and
Mhm.
it's a great part of the world for adventure travel. And so you can, sort of have these exclusive experiences that a lot of high-end travelers crave, so they can have bragging rights that, something their friends haven't done. And I saw all that and just saw that nobody was really covering it in depth. And so I had some writing assignments for other publications where I was reviewing hotels in Argentina and Peru and some other countries. So I basically just took all my own research that I'd already done and launched the site with a few countries to start, and then I just kept adding and adding. And I started hiring freelancers who lived at these places, and just kept building up the content over time. So I've got a really good Google domain ranking. Like, it's, first of all, it's old; it's been up since 2007, and also there's still nobody covering that part of the world exclusively. I basically cover Mexico down through Antarctica, and there's plenty of high-end publications covering those countries now and then, but they're more focused on Europe or Asia or the whole world, basically, whereas I'm only concentrating on those Latin American countries. So I honestly can say for sure that this site has more in-depth reviews. It has more in-depth information. It's more comprehensive. It's updated more often. So thankfully, Google most of the time will recognize that and
Mhm.
rank us fairly well.
And I think I heard that it was your most profitable site.
Yeah, it is, just because there's a lot more money in budget in luxury travel than there is in budget travel. It's just, I learned this from the beginning. Budget travelers are very fragmented. They don't book cruises, they don't book the same hotel brand on a regular basis. They don't do any of those things that advertisers are focused on. And so we're very hard to reach when we're budget travelers. We just basically go for whatever has the best price and whatever's the best value. And we don't have any loyalty. And so we're not good advertising targets. Whereas the luxury audience, if you can get people to spend 10 grand a pop on a tour, you could spend a lot of money advertising to get those people in. So we do a lot of direct deals. We have good display ads showing up. We do pretty well with affiliate things where people, click on a link and book something. So it is the most profitable.
Hmm.
Hey everybody, hey everybody. Quick break from the podcast to tell you about Language Blend, the best new way to learn Spanish. Language Blend was co-founded by Jake Nomada, friend of the podcast, decade of experience in Latin America, and Jake and his team, they put everything into this program that they wish they had in terms of how to level up quickly with your Spanish language skills. Because the faster that you can get conversationally fluent in Spanish, the better the experience that you're going to have in Latin America. So go to languageblend.com for more information.
And do people ever tell you, or does it make you think that you should go up market across everything? Maybe even sell the cheap stuff, sell the cheap websites, and go luxury on everything?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just my heart's not in it, because I think it is important to have passion for what you cover and for it to be a natural fit. And believe me, I like staying in those hotels with the nice bathrobes and the plunge pool and all that, but I would never spend money on them on my own dime because I just think it's not a great value for me because I'm not a millionaire. If I were, then I would feel differently about it. So I have this still in my life, this schizophrenic travel situation where I'll be at some luxury palace for a few nights because I'm writing about it, and then we'll go stay at the Airbnb that's $50 a night, and get some work done
Uh-huh.
because that's just more my lifestyle and my budget, and I like the slow travel way of traveling much more than the stay 3 nights at the Rosewood and then go home. So it's just yeah, I do like writing the books, and I think to write a book about luxury travel would be a lot different, and I don't know, maybe wouldn't do as well either.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm kind of at this crossroads myself because, like you, I'm passionate about talking about living cheap, and I think that that's certainly one angle to bring people to Latin America. But maybe the other angle is more the live like a king angle, and of course, it costs a little bit less, but more the live like a king angle than the like extend your runway angle, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I just was thinking about this just now as you said that. Like, I think maybe luxury travelers aren't looking for advice as much as independent budget travelers are because they've got somebody else setting it all up for them. Either
True.
they have a travel agent or they have a full-time assistant, or they're not doing the hard stuff. They're just making the big decisions about where are we going to go and what's the itinerary going to look like. Show me some examples. Okay, I'll pick letter C, let's go with that. And then they're done. Like somebody else is taking care of all the logistics.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And then, so how do you get at the luxury travelers if they're not doing the research themselves?
Well, some of them are just because they think it's fun, like they want to see what kind of fancy hotels are in that location, and they want to, look at all the best options for Cusco and decide which one is the best fit for them. So they will come on our site and like look at all the luxury hotel reviews and decide which one is ideal. But then they'll hand it over to somebody else to do the bookings, and maybe they want to go on a tour of the Sacred Valley in Machu Picchu, but they're
Mhm.
not sure, how all that plays out, and so they'll do a little research just to figure it out. But then, you know, they're not they're not doing the dirty work of making all the bookings and working out the transportation.
Cool, cool. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can I get a backlink?
Yes, of course. Um, I write about Mexico and living abroad on all those good things. So, and yeah, of course, we have tour stories and all that. So, yeah, we'll sort something out.
Well, I just want to do all our recording to pressure you, but no.
Yeah, and we
Uh,
could do a three-way because I have multiple sites.
yeah, no, for sure. Hey, I mean, our website's been around since 2013, 2014. It's not a bad one either to have.
Wow, congratulations, 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. Cool. I mean, Tim, this is really fun to do an episode with you. I definitely wanted to try to ask you a little bit of things that you haven't been asked before. So that's why I didn't ask you about every detail of living in Guanajuato because I know you've gotten into it in the past. So, we talked a little bit about medical stuff. We talked about schooling. We talked about luxury travel. Um, Really fun, really cool to hear your voice
Yeah, and
after
if
so
any
many
of your
podcasts.
listeners are coming through, feel free to hit me up. I'm away a lot, but when I'm here in Guanajuato, I like meeting up with travelers who are coming through, and we can have a beer together.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you follow us on Twitter, right? You enjoy the My Latin Life Twitter.
Yeah, you have some good tweets on there, and I like the mindset shift kind of things. Just convincing people that it's not a scary world out there, and oh, by the way, you can spend half as much as you're spending now for a more interesting life.
Yeah, I think your book title is one of the best book titles ever. And I always got confused. I don't know if you've heard this before, but so your book is A Better Life for Half the Price. And then there's another book called Your Money or Your Life, which you might be familiar with.
Yeah, I read that a long time ago, the very first edition. Um, but that's more about being frugal, like you don't need as much stuff as you think you need, but it's not about, they don't really talk much about living abroad, I don't think, if at all. They talk about like sharing a house with two other couples, maybe, things like that.
Oh, really? Okay. We'll scrap that. I thought it was more about like get a nest egg and then live off the interest, the financial independence, retire early type stuff.
Yeah, that book was kind of before all that, I think, but they do talk about that some, but they're talking more about um, kind of resisting the consumerism and the keeping up with the Joneses kind of stuff, and
Right.
just trying to find meaning in life instead of finding it through your stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your book title, it's almost impossible to deny. Like, if anyone took a self aware glance, they could be like, it's pretty hard to deny, like, yes, I could obviously go somewhere else and live a better life for half the price.
Yeah, and I think people think it's impossible to live in Europe, for example, on a reasonable price because they've heard it's super expensive there. And it is if you go to Paris or London or somewhere like that. But there's, hundreds of reasonable places to live in Europe, and the quality of life is so much better. Like it's so much more walkable, and healthcare is better, and they're just their cities are built for people and not cars, and so that alone can just make such a difference in your life.
Yeah. Do you have a car in Mexico?
I don't, and I don't need one here. Actually, we rent one every once in a while to take a road trip. But this city is kind of interesting. They built these tunnels through the mountains to kind of divert the traffic, and
Hmm.
so the whole pedestrian center only has two streets on it with cars, and all the rest is pedestrian only. And then these, they call them callejones, these alleyways that
Alleys.
go up the hills.
Hmm.
They're all steps basically. So we live on one. It's like 42 steps to our house, which is keeps you in shape, but yeah, we walk everywhere, and then if we do need a taxi, it's $3 or $4, the equivalent of.
Nice. And your neighbors got dogs on the roof and all that?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one downside of Mexico. I have a post about the pros and cons of living in Mexico, and one of them is you must get used to noise. It is always noisy unless you're like out in the countryside or maybe sitting on an empty beach. They just have a different tolerance for noise than we do in our culture, and so you got to get used to dogs on the roof that are basically a lame security system, and music played at all hours at full volume. And sometimes you'll walk down the beach and hear three different stereos playing at one time, and nobody
Hmm.
thinks anything of it.
It's so funny. So, if people wanted to read more of your writing specifically about Mexico and Latin America, which of the sites would that be?
Well, my cheapest destinations blog is the best if you're on a budget or you're an independent traveler on your own. And you can just search Mexico, search Guanajuato. Everything's tagged and categorized. If you're at the other end of the scale and you are a luxury traveler, then go to Luxury Latin America, and we've got reviews, lots of tour stories, and there is a blog there where the fun part we didn't talk about on that blog is I really ramped this up during the pandemic, but I review spirits on there like rum and tequila and mezcal and other things that
Oh,
are
nice.
produced in Latin America. And so I get to have fun with that on the blog, and it allows me to write off booze purchases on my taxes, which is a dream.
Shit, I need something like that. So, what's your go-to tequila or mezcal right now?
Well, the one I probably buy the most is Cazadores because I think it's a great value. It's made in the highlands of Jalisco, so it's a little more like herbal and floral, and doesn't put hair on your chest, maybe. But like if I'm somewhere like an all-inclusive resort and I can drink whatever's on the shelf, then I drink Don Julio, or the really good one is the 1942 one that's in a tall bottle. But one quick thing to know is Jose Cuervo Gold is a terrible tequila. It's
Oh yeah,
their best known brand, but it's awful.
terrible.
But Jose Cuervo puts out so much great stuff. So if you see 1800, that's really good. Centenario is good. A lot of the big brands that Mexicans buy are actually pretty good because they're all 100% agave. And sometimes you can find ones that are even the equivalent of like 14, $15 that are quite good. As long as they say 100% agave on the label, 100% blue agave, then it's going to be at least decent.
Yeah, that surprised me too. That Mexicans don't even drink Cuervo. It's like a crappy one.
No, they put their nose up at it, and I don't blame them.
One last question. If you had to live in any other city in Mexico that was not Guanajuato, nor anything in the state of Guanajuato, where would you live?
I think about this a lot, and there's a lot of them that I would be comfortable living in. I've heard Jalapa's nice, but I've never been there. I could live in Puebla for sure. They have the biggest colonial center in Mexico, actually, but it is a big city. I think Querétaro is quite nice, although it's kind of dustier there because they have a desert nearby that the winds are blowing through sometimes. I like Merida in the winter, but I would never live there in the hot months. And on the flip side of that, I like San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas a lot, but it gets quite cold there in the wintertime. And there's also not a really good airport connection there. And that's important to me. I want to be in a place with, good air connections. Um, and I like being at the beach, but I don't really want to live in any of the beach towns. I like going there on vacation.
So would you say Puebla, or
Yeah,
give me a quick one,
yeah,
top three
probably
or something?
Pueblo or Querétaro. I
Yeah.
like this elevation. I like this, year-round nice temperature thing.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't? I mean, Guanajuato definitely is amazing weather. Very cool. All right. Well, I think we put Guanajuato as well as Puebla on people's radar a little bit more. Tim, thank you so much for doing this podcast episode. Really great to connect. Use this time to direct the audience's attention one more time to your sites and wherever you want to send them.
Well, if you could just remember my name, that's an easy one. TimLeffel.com links out to everything like my freelance articles, my websites, my books, and all of that. So just go to TimLeffel.com and that'll connect you wherever you want to go.
Sweet.
All my socials are on there as well.
Leffel backwards, still Leffel.
Yeah, palindrome.
Palindrome. Yeah, I was thinking of the word. Cool. Well, this has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, my guest today, Tim Leffel. Thanks, everyone, for listening.